Hey there and welcome back to Rimworld. My name is Pete and today we complete another episode of Rimworld Odyssey. Last time we left off after an eventful encounter with a trade caravan and two thrumbos that brought some unexpected wealth to the colony. We also finally unlocked electricity and Brian's ex-lover Alex decided to join us, so things are starting to look up. Now, before we get into today's episode, I have to make a quick announcement that probably means a lot more to me than it does to you, but I'm getting married soon. The reason I'm telling you this in the first place is just to hopefully explain why things on the channel have been a little slow these last 1 or 2 weeks, and it is also to prepare you for the next week, where I will most likely not post any videos at all. So we'll take a short break in our Rimworld Odyssey adventure after this episode, in which we can hopefully start or even finish construction of our very own Gravship. First of all though, a solar flare shuts down the electricity that we worked so hard to set up last time, so let's work on another important to-do as Alex moves a bedroll into this chamber here, where we found some insects a while ago. They are long gone, but a lone egg sac still remains and emits light, and that is exactly why we are now making this room our temporary hospital for the long overdue lung transplant for Brian. Promptly after cleaning up the place, Alex suffers a mental break, but thankfully she is not needed for what comes next. Before we can get to cutting Brian open though, the power comes back on, so we focus on making some meals for the rest of the day and only send Brian to the operating table in the evening. His lungs' organ decay has unfortunately progressed to severe, and while it is still below the halfway mark of total severity, I think the time has come where delaying much longer becomes increasingly risky. So we now send over our Itakin Reno, who with a medical skill of 6 is barely more than a capable amateur, but still he is our most competent doctor at the moment, and we have done all we can to maximize his success chance. And indeed, he does succeed, so Brian has a new lung now, and will immediately move back into our regular shelter. That's such a big relief, and prevents us from having to force the issue at a later point in time. With the night setting in, Nelgrav can also sneak up on a monitor lizard here and shoot it, but only once. That is enough to cause an eventually fatal injury, while, and this is important, it does not count as killing the animal, which will prevent further mood penalties for Reno, whose animal personhood radar ideology strictly forbids it. By the way, that ideology also forbids eating meat, so I've set him to a vegetarian diet, so with careful management of these two factors we should hopefully see his mood improve by a few points soon. On the next morning then, with Brian already back up on his feet, a local raccoon goes mad and triggers another hunting trip. Not asleep, it will be much harder to hit, so we prepare carefully with the river and Colossus Toad Heezer protecting Nelgrav, and then the raccoon goes down in just 2 hits and doesn't even get to attack once. Still better to over-prepare than to make costly mistakes, and since this animal was a manhunter, Reno also does not get a mood penalty for the kill. Then we complete the research of psychoid brewing, so we can finally satisfy Nelgrav's genetic dependency. And up next, let's finish what we started at the very beginning of the series, complex furniture. Now, this is mostly needed to make shelves for better storage, and perhaps an end table to boost the comfort of our bedrolls. I don't see us build too much else in what little time we likely have left in this biome. Yes, indeed, after reading your comments on the last episode, I think it makes the most sense for our people to build their Gravship and move on to greener pastures, maybe quite literally. I don't really believe there is a whole lot that keeps them here in the Scarlands, and I feel like all of them would have their reasons to leave. Maybe Nelgrav would be most likely to stay as a waster, but even he hasn't really had a great time in this place, so a fresh start elsewhere might be in everyone's best interest. And to facilitate that fresh start, we need our Gravship, and to build it we need steel, and lots of it. So, first things first, let's disassemble our old fuel stove. We won't find enough wood for it anyway. And then, as Brian gathers all the steel from storage, our goat Selonic once again gives birth. And the offspring is lucky to be female, so we are joined by Ruka, named after patron supporter Ruka21. Brian, meanwhile, has carried the steel south to the grav engine that crashed a while back, and which you can now inspect closer. And with that, we have now officially unlocked the basic grav tag project to be researched, which will give us all the tools we need to build our very own Gravship. Very importantly, we are also informed that launching our Gravship will abandon this map tile unless we build a grav anchor first. That is locked behind a more advanced research project though, so I don't think we'll do that. Now, the Gravship also comes with its very own quest line. The first subquest gives us an ancient stockpile to explore, which houses a grav core, arguably one of the most important devices for more complex Gravship designs, and definitely something we'll keep on our radar. Up next, we can now deconstruct these ship chunks here that crashed alongside the grav engine. Each one yields 40 steel and 15 grav light panels, a new item in the Odyssey expansion and used to construct the all-important Gravship substructure, the foundation for all further Gravship construction. Without it, the ship is basically impossible to build. Now, with Alex coming out of a mental break, we then deconstruct the 2 poor-quality bedrolls outside the base, and with the recovered cloth, we have her try again on the next morning, and her level 5 construction skill produces good quality. That's lovely. The lizard has also perished, and Reno can now butcher it, no mood penalty for that. Nonetheless, he suffers a mental break soon after, once again wandering around in sadness because we refuse to raid anyone. Alex and Brian, meanwhile, are working on the Gravship materials, deconstructing all the ship chunks around the grav engine. A total of 200 steel can be gained this way, but we likely need more than double the amount. In that moment, our researchers also unlock complex furniture, and that's why we inspected the grav engine when we did, since we can now jump straight to basic grav tag to unlock all the important Gravship elements. Alex and Brian can also chop some wood near the grav engine. A nice cluster of trees is growing here, and while Brian then heads back to the shelter, Alex keeps scavenging for a little while longer, deconstructing a steel ruin near the western edge of the map. This is polluted territory though, so we need to keep an eye on her. Unfortunately, Nailgrav then suffers another psychoid-related mental break just before we can cook up the first batch of tea for him. As you can see, our psychoid plants are just now ready to be harvested. Alex, meanwhile, has moved on to another steel structure, but she is experiencing the effects of both toxic buildup and heat stroke. Outside temperatures currently sit at a not-so-comfortable 42 degrees Celsius, which does also slow down research somewhat, and overall puts our pawns in a pretty bad mood. However, at least for Alex, who has the Bloodlust trait, we can solve the issue by having her equip the tainted duster that is still lying around the nearby ruins. The fact that it was taken from a dead body doesn't bother her, although being tattered apparel is not great for her mood either. Still, it keeps her cool, and that's all that counts for now. On the next morning then, Brian and Alex take a quick break from steel gathering to bring in another rice harvest, which advances Brian's plant skill to level 8, an important threshold as he's now able to plant healroot. Now, I don't think we'll stick around long enough for a full growth cycle, but wherever we settle next, this will be among the first things we put in the ground. Then it's back to scavenging. We now need to carry all that steel back to the grav engine. I think it will likely be easier to move the items we want to take with us down there, instead of bringing all the materials back to the shelter. A few hours later, we have 420 steel assembled. I think we're going to need about 600 for everything we want to construct, so we still have a bit of a way to go. We then also receive a quest for an ancient complex, and it's actually not too far away. Perhaps a spot to visit from our new settlement. For the time being, it would only delay our efforts. In the evening then, Reno can finally cook up the first batch of Psychite tea, advancing his cooking skill to level 9, and finally removing the massive mood penalty and the withdrawal effects for Nailgrav. However, those mood effects come with a slight caveat, because unfortunately his ideology actually frowns upon drug usage, and so his -17 withdrawal penalty is simply replaced by a -15 ideology penalty, not exactly a huge improvement. Early on the next morning, we then complete the research of basic grav tech, and I think up next we unfortunately have to go with biofuel refining. To power the Gravship, some chem fuel is needed, and while I had hoped to be able to tame or purchase 1 or 2 boomalopes by now, it sadly hasn't happened, so unless we find another way of making chem fuel, our Gravship won't go anywhere. Since we're making good progress in terms of steel, up next we also need components. A few are still in storage, and a few more can be obtained from the component box in the ruins here, a grand total of 11, more than enough for what we need. Now, with the research completed, let's talk Gravship. To make it lift off, we need a fuel tank for 120 steel, at least 1 thruster for 180 steel and 4 components, and a pilot console for 140 steel and 3 components. All of that will need to be built on Gravship's substructure, and we also want our ship to have a hull with 7 steel per piece. That doesn't come cheap either. However, construction begins with some rather trivial shelves. Space inside our Gravship will come at a premium, so these will be important to bring along all our valuables. As Brian then passes by the ruins, we officially discover the ancient danger on this map, but I don't think we're going to open it before we leave. Back at the shelter, our teenager River goes on an insulting spree because installing an organ on someone is also not up to her ideology standards, regardless of whether or not it saved Brian's life. Alex, meanwhile, has begun mining the one and only steel vein on the map. With her mining skill of 3, she's actually the most capable colonist for this, but we shouldn't expect to receive a whole lot from this. River's insulting spree then comes to an end as she picks a fight with Reno, but since our Itakin is incapable of violence, it is a rather one-sided affair. Good thing we gave the Thrumberhorn to Alex already, otherwise this could have ended much worse than with a few cracks and bruises. Nelgrav then patches up those injuries as our steel supply increases to over 600. A bit more is needed still, but we're getting closer. On the following morning, we can already carry some of our inventory down to the shipbuilding site, and we're using the caravan trick for this. We place a caravan spot, form a one-man caravan with Brian, and this now allows us to use the full capacity of his inventory to carry much more than just a single item or stack down to where we eventually want to lift off. We only need to make sure he doesn't actually wander off the map, but simply drafting Brian and manually sending him to his destination works well. Once he arrives, we can then have him unpack and sort everything into shelves. Up next, we chop some more wood to make more of those shelves, as we want to store as much as we can on board of our ship. Alex, meanwhile, is finishing up her mining work, so we should have another 100 steel or so incoming. So, in the early evening, she can construct 2 more shelves, and on the next morning, you can see it here, the plans for our first Gravship are in place, and as luck would have it, a small group of Bog Hounds has wandered onto the map at this exact spot. For now, though, they leave Alex and Brian in peace as they start to place the Gravship substructure here. We need our best constructors on the job to avoid wasting precious steel through botched construction. After several hours of non-stop work, the foundation is coming along just as we unlock biofuel refining and can now make our own chem fuel. Up next, I think we should unlock stone cutting, but the next 1 or 2 projects will mostly only serve to keep our researchers busy and to unlock some basic tech along the way. Everything we need to lift off has already been unlocked. Just as Alex puts the last grav light panel in place, we are then informed that our goat Corsaro has a heart attack. Now this is bad, because it could quickly kill our only male goat, and yet I don't feel comfortable wasting all of our precious medicine on this. So with Reno still recovering, we send Nelgrav in and hope for the best. With every tending attempt here, he only has a small chance of making the condition better, but there is also a chance of it resolving itself, and weirdly enough, that seems to be exactly what happened here. After an early treatment success, Corsaro is now stable, and we can keep making baby goats for a little while longer. Alex then constructs a biofuel refinery near the base. Unfortunately, the thing isn't portable, and I don't have the Minify Everything mod installed for this playthrough, so we need to place it here where there's power. We will also have Reno immediately start to make some more chem fuel, despite his injuries. With our Gravship now officially under construction, I really want to see it lift off as soon as possible. And yes, we are using some of our precious potatoes for this. Unfortunately, hay does not work. With 70 units of chem fuel in storage, we can then immediately disassemble the device again on the next morning to regain precious steel and haul it to the building site, where Brian is promptly attacked by a Bog Hound. So let's hightail it out of here. We have enough of a head start to outrun the beast and to welcome it with Nelgrav, River, Alex and Colossus Toad Heezer. Let's hope that that's enough to take it down. Alright, Alex seems to be the only one who suffered an injury here, a nasty bite to her leg, but the others are fine and we have one Bog Hound less to worry about. With that, Brian can now go back to the shipbuilding site and start construction of its hull, introducing us to the first time since its release that Rimworld finally offers diagonal walls. Sadly, these can only be constructed as part of a Gravship, but they look nice and help with the design I was going for. Also helping is a brave monitor lizard here, getting attacked by Bog Hound number 2, but surprisingly it actually wins the fight, so that is one predator less to worry about, and just like that, stone cutting has been unlocked. Let's continue with batteries then, those are always nice to have, and complete our Gravship hull. Maybe you can see it, I was trying to have it vaguely resemble the shape of a toad or frog head, as a nod to Brian's Colossus Toad Heezer. However, we are working with limited space and resources here and cannot afford a larger ship at the moment, so this will have to do as Alex now constructs the fuel tank at a cost of 120 steel. But construction is interrupted by Brian once again ending up on a Bog Hounds menu, so let's run away once more and set up the same ambush as before. This time, however, the Bog Hound changes targets midway through and finds a raccoon to kill instead, so we can go back to our business, while the predator will eventually succumb to its injuries. That's just lovely. The last Bog Hound, by the way, is also bleeding out and dies on the next morning. It too picked a fight with a lizard, which are apparently not to be underestimated. And so, Alex finishes the fuel tank and can now fill it up before she ventures over to the crashed Imperial shuttle with Brian to deconstruct it. As before, this yields steel, plasteel and components, but, and that's new in Odyssey, also a shuttle engine. And this little thing is very valuable, as it allows us to build our own shuttles. Yes, in the Odyssey expansion you can not only build Gravships, but also this very handy mode of transport. Now, it also comes with a rather hefty 2500 silver wealth spike, but that hopefully won't affect us for too much longer. Either way, let us now give our Gravship a plasteel door to save some more steel, and we can also haul the grav engine inside. The ship is slowly coming along. Up next, we begin an early harvest. We won't stick around for long enough to see any of these plants to full maturity, so let's cut them down and get at least a partial harvest now, so that Reno can perhaps produce a few more meals with the meat from all the dead animals. We are also already deconstructing our steel research bench. Unfortunately, we need the materials for the Gravship, so research will be a little slower for the rest of the way, but then again, we don't have any hugely critical projects we're currently working on. With the sun setting, our Gravship now receives a roof, and Nelgrav starts another round of insane ramblings, because he used a drug, which he is literally genetically forced to, but I guess he's just complicated like that. In the middle of the night, the Royal Tribute Collector then shows up for the first time in this series, but since they are not interested in farm animals, we have nothing to give. And speaking of farm animals, in the early morning, Silonic once again gives birth, and even though it is a male, we are going to keep it after Corsaro just gave us that heart attack scare, and so we welcome Caleb to the vlog, named after channel supporter Caleb Phillips. Then we proceed with the harvest and slowly begin to break up camp. We uninstall the bedrolls, disassemble the butcher table for materials, Do the same to the table and chair inside our shelter. Our taxonomist Brian can then lead all of our animals out of their pen and around the toxic lake towards the Gravship, where Alex is currently constructing a small thruster and River is already loading up the shelves. Reno, meanwhile, cooks the last psychoid leaves into tea before we then start to disassemble the stove too. I know that we will have to rebuild all of these devices on the next map, but there is simply no other steel left on this one, and we still have a little bit of construction left to do. We wait just a moment longer until Nailgraph unlocks batteries, and then use the caravan trick once again to collect anything in our small shelter that we want to bring along. Considering our short list of possessions, that's basically all of it. Eventually then, Alex, Reno and Nailgraph have their pockets full and make it over to the Gravship late at night. But there won't be any rest just yet. We also still need to bring all animals on board and construct a pilot console, the last missing piece before our Gravship is finally complete. Let me also quickly point out that you can absolutely launch a Gravship without a hull whatsoever and arrive safely on another map tile as long as you don't go into space. So that would have been possible here too, but I just feel like it would be a bit too cheesy. Either way, with the last grav light panels brought on board, we are ready for liftoff. The Gravship launch is a procedure that has a quality similar to a ritual. The piloting ability here depends partially on the intellectual stat, which is how we end up with 13-year-old River at the helm, on our journey to, well, to where exactly? This right here is the radius of all tiles we could travel to. Our chem fuel is only enough to get us to any tile within the inner yellow circle, which consists basically of 3 biomes, arid shrubland and the new glow forest and grasslands. And I would say, let's leave the answer to where our next settlement is going to be for the next episode. A little cliffhanger today, as we end this first chapter of the series with the liftoff of our very own Gravship. And with that, let's transition into the fan art section of the video as we leave the colony of Finster behind and await the next chapter in this Rimworld Odyssey adventure. I think the Scarlands served as a great start to focus on survival in a brutal environment that is for once not dominated by ice and snow, but I think our colonists have earned a ticket to a better place, and all 3 biomes we can reach with our ship would offer that, no question about it. Now, to end this week's fan art showcase, I would like to leave you with a little narration, not done by me, but by Patreon supporter Doids, who sent in a short story about Brian's journey, the mental and psychological one, and they were kind enough to record a reading of it, so enjoy a short dive into the mind of our colony founder Brian Burr, and I can already say thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.
When I was a child, my mother told me tales of the cannibals of the ice, Cambier and his crew, men who did what they had to survive in the coldest part of their world. Reruns on the holotube showed the exploits of Stake and his stakeholders in the desert, persevering under the burning sun and rising to imperial royalty without compromising his values. I told myself I would be like Stake, steadfast, unyielding, and never like Cambier, twisted and vile, gnawing on the bones of others just to see another dawn. But that was before the bog. Before I crash-landed in that foul, stinking mire, the air thick with toxins, the ground alive with biting insects. Before the only friend I had was Hesser, a frog that understood more than most men. Before I learned what it was to feel like a child, lost in a world too cruel to care. I sent lanterns up into the sky, beacons to the stars, desperate call for help. But they drifted away, free to ascend to the heavens while I sank deeper into the muck. Hope would flash in the distance, only to be swallowed by the same poison that seeped into my lungs. We survived by the grace of strangers, the Finnan traders, the goats, the chickens, even the uneasy truce with those I once called enemies. I took the clothes of a trader named Leonard in the heat of the bog, and later saved his life in the storm of violence. And Alex returned, a shadow of herself. The bog changes people. Maybe it softened her. Maybe it rotted me. The rain here falls thick and black, tasting of metal and regret. I coughed until my lungs began to fail, and that's when aid arrived. Not for me, but for Alex. The nights are full of gunfire, the days of sickness. Thrumbos came and died. Traders were torn apart. Pirates swarmed in the chaos. The rain returned, the sky's venom washing over us, while my mind frayed under psychic storms. Then the hallucinations began. Shadows that walked where no one stood. Voices that whispered in the spaces between breaths, calling me by name, telling me what I deserved, what I could take if I only had the will. And now, here I stand, scalpel in hand, the voices close around me. They tell me to take what I need, a healthy lung, to breathe to see another day. They promise the stars. Like Odysseus, I will face every trial, break every oath, become what I must to return to my Ithaca, the black beyond, the quiet between suns. And when it is done, I will step over what remains and leave him to the river.